You're not on the invite. That's how I found out my own client, my $40 million client, was having a final prep call without me. I stared at the Outlook notification, reading and rereading the names. Mark, of course, two junior sales reps who'd barely been in the company long enough to know where the bathrooms were, and not a trace of mine. Just vanished, like I'd never been part of the account I'd bled to build. That logistics firm wasn't just a line item in Salesforce. I'd spent 8 months mapping their systems, attending 7 a.m. warehouse walkthroughs, staying up till 2 a.m. making sure our platform could speak their language. I'd seen marriages with less communication, and now here I was, locked out of the final call like some ghost in a cubicle. I should have confronted him right then. Should have marched into Mark's glass office with its sterile little succulents and said, "What the hell is this?" But I didn't. Because I've learned something in 20 years of corporate survival. You never walk into a gunfight holding a stapler. You wait, you study, and then you flip the whole table when no one sees it coming. But before we go any further, if you're listening and haven't hit subscribe or tap like, do it now. Seriously. The team puts their backs into getting these stories to you, and it really keeps the fire burning. All right, back to this slow-moving train wreck. Mark had been at the company for a grand total of 3 weeks when he decided he was king of the sandbox. Corporate had slapped some made-up title on him, VP of Strategic Accounts, and he floated around like a helium balloon in a button-down. All buzzwords and borrowed charisma. You know the type. He had that tight, performative smile that screamed networking event and the emotional depth of a LinkedIn comment thread. First thing he did, announced a reorg, said we needed to optimize customer-facing exposure. Translation? He kicked me off every call, stripped my name from every deck, and handed my accounts to a couple of fresh out of grad school Salesforce jockeys who still thought procurement was a dating app. I tried to play it cool. "Hey Mark, just noticed I wasn't listed on the client call calendar this week. That a mistake?" He grinned like I'd complimented his socks and said, "Trying something new? You've done great groundwork, but it's time to elevate the optics." "Don't worry, we'll loop you in where it counts," I smiled back. The kind of smile you make when someone tells you they ran over your dog, but only a little. It was a strange sort of betrayal, not loud, not dramatic, just erasure, polite, surgical erasure. I was still invited to internal huddles, still CC'd on summaries, but I'd become background noise. Kind of person who made other people feel organized, but never got the credit for building the whole damn process. The younger reps started parroting my phrasing in meetings. One of them, Kevin, even presented my integration checklist, my exact format, fonts and all, as his own during a mock run-through. I watched Mark nod approvingly while sipping his oat milk latte, completely unbothered. The logistics client, let's call them Freight Axis, wasn't dumb. You could feel their energy change. Shorter emails, fewer emojis. The account lead on their side, Denise, was polite but clipped. She'd ask a technical question, Kevin would try to answer, and then she'd say, "Can Susan confirm?" Mark hated that. You could see the vein in his temple pulse every time my name came up. But I didn't fight it, not yet. I kept every email, every Slack ping, every version of the pitch deck with the edit history, showing who deleted my name slide by slide. I let them build their little cardboard empire on top of the foundation I poured, because I'd already started pouring concrete somewhere else. You see, this wasn't the first time I'd been shoved aside by a shiny new hire with a catchy job title and an empty inbox. A few years ago, during a previous merger, a similar situation nearly cost me a multi-year client. That time I didn't see it coming. But I learned. Oh, I learned. Which is why, 6 months ago, before Mark even knew we existed, I sat down with our legal team and requested a quiet change to the master service agreement template. Just one line, one bullet point, buried deep in Section 9.3 under Executive Authorization and Deliverables Oversight. It designated a named officer for sign-offs and decisions, a name that could not be changed without formal amendment and dual executive review. That name? Mine. They laughed at the time, called it belt and suspenders, but they signed it, and the client signed it, and legal filed it. Now all I had to do was wait, because Mark may have booked himself into the meetings. He may have replaced my face on the slide decks, but he didn't know whose name was legally welded into the deal. And when that last slide came up, I'd wish he'd just let me in the room. The official invite to the final client rehearsal hit my inbox at 6:43 p.m. on a Thursday. I was listed as optional, which in corporate doublespeak means irrelevant, but were too cowardly to say it outright. The subject line read, Strategic Realignment Presentation Final Dry Run. My name, once at the top of every Freight Axis doc, wasn't anywhere on the agenda. Not even as a footnote. I stared at it while nuking leftover lo mein, the orange glow of the microwave somehow making the word optional sting even worse. A year of building Freight Axis from a cold lead into a near-signed contract, and now I was a nice to have. It felt like being uninvited from a wedding you helped plan, because the groom wants better photos. The meeting wasn't just missing me, it had been rebuilt without me. The deck was now in Kevin's hands, a 26-year-old who once asked me what EDI meant in a logistics context. Rachel, who'd cried in the parking lot after botching her first client call, was now listed as integration lead. Integration of what, exactly? Her lunch into her Outlook calendar? I forced myself to breathe. My first instinct was to storm into Mark's office and confront him. But you don't challenge men like Mark when they're still high on their own Kool-Aid. They're most dangerous when they think they've optimized something. I needed receipts. I opened up our internal CMS and started going through the documentation trail. Slowly, quietly, page by page. Proposal drafts, org charts, task ownership logs, and that's when I saw it. In the latest client contact summary sent to Freight Axis, I was listed as supporting staff. Not strategic lead, not solutions manager, just a background extra in my own production. In another doc, the stakeholder comms tracker, I wasn't listed at all. Even the escalation matrix, which I built from scratch, had my escalation line rerouted to Rachel. It wasn't a mistake. It was a rewrite. I hadn't just been sidelined. I was being redrafted out of history. That night, I pulled up every single signed document that had ever gone to Freight Axis. My original integration strategy doc was gone from the shared folder, replaced with a watered-down version Kevin clearly didn't write. My name had been systematically removed from the slide master, and even the client timeline no longer had my initials. I felt something inside me harden, not rage, not even grief, just frost, like my blood had made up its mind before my brain had caught up. I was done waiting for permission to exist. The next morning, I walked past Mark's office without making eye contact. He was laughing on the phone, probably rehearsing his visionary closing speech. He didn't even notice I was there. Good. Ghosts aren't supposed to be visible. Back at my desk, I opened my personal encrypted drive and started a new folder, Pitch Reorg Susan Langley Trail. I copied every single asset with an edit history. Every timestamp deletion of my name. Every version of the deck from Susan V1 to Mark Final 2. I exported Slack threads, calendar invites, and screen recordings of internal dashboards showing my early ownership of every deliverable. Next, I reached out to legal, not to escalate, just to confirm some language in our MSA clauses. I played it breezy. Told them I was reviewing compliance best practices for named officer designations. Asked if they still had the signed Freight Axis version on file. They did. I requested a copy, just in case. Then I made a list, not of names, of functions, who signed what, who edited what, who removed me and when. It wasn't about revenge, it was about alignment. Legal, technical, historical. Because if they were going to rewrite me out of the present, I was going to carve my name into the contract's bones. You can remove someone from the slide deck. You can't erase them from the legal binding clause without triggering dual-party renegotiation. That clause I buried months ago, the one no one paid attention to because it looked boring, it wasn't just belt and suspenders, it was body armor. And the second they tried to parade into that client pitch without me, I was going to light up the whole damn room. For now, I kept my smile fixed. I nodded in meetings. I said, "Great work, team," through gritted teeth. I even offered Rachel a throat lozenge when her voice cracked practicing my lines. Polite, helpful, humiliated on paper. But underneath, I was conducting a forensic audit of my own erasure. And the next time Mark told me to be a team player, I'd make sure the only team left was me and the client. It started with Carl. Carl, for the record, was the kind of executive who used the word synergy without flinching and wore expensive shoes that squeaked on carpet. Last year, during a separate contract cycle, Carl tried to hijack my work with a client called West Point Packaging. Showed up uninvited to one of my QBRs, nodded along while I presented, and then had the audacity to send my deck to the client later, watermarking it with his initials. His initials. I'd ghostwritten his rise to mediocrity. Legal called it a misunderstanding. HR called it miscommunication. Carl called it collaborative acceleration. I called it a warning. So a week after that debacle, I made an appointment with legal. Not to vent, not to fight, to future-proof. I want a clause, I told Naomi, one of the sharpest compliance attorneys we had. I don't want my work co-signed. I want it walled in. She raised an eyebrow. That's strong. I want my name in the MSA, I said. Not just in email chains, I want it in the legal backbone. I want it to say that for any and all deliverables, integration decisions, and implementation sign-offs, the company requires my explicit written authorization. Me, by name, not role-based, not account lead. Susan Langley. Naomi blinked. They'll think you're paranoid. Good, I said. Let them think that. Just get it in writing. She did. She drafted it like it was a footnote. Section 9.3b, buried halfway through a paragraph no one would ever bother reading unless their job depended on it. One sentence. All strategic deliverables, service authorizations, and project implementation milestones require written sign-off from the named officer. Susan Langley. Simple, dry, absolute. We added it to the Freight Axis MSA mid-negotiation during a batch of small revisions. It passed legal review without so much as a shrug. Freight Axis signed it, our execs skimmed it. Carl didn't even read it. They thought it was about branding, or maybe ego. They were used to people like me smiling through stolen credit and nodding while someone else got the LinkedIn praise post. But I wasn't asking for a shout-out. I was setting a trap. And now, months later, with Mark strutting around like he was the architect of a contract, he didn't even know the square footage of I had it. The clause, the quiet little landmine with my name on it, sitting untouched in the middle of the deal. The beauty of it, Mark had no clue. Why would he? He never read the actual MSA. His version of contract review was searching the doc for buzzwords like digital transformation and ROI. He wouldn't know a clause from a Clausewitz. He thought his name on the deck made him real, but I didn't need a deck. I had a legally binding clause that made me necessary, not nice to have, not optional attendee, required by contract. It was the calmest I'd felt in weeks. No frantic PowerPoint editing, no begging to be included in rehearsals, no backroom alliances. I just kept attending meetings like a friendly ghost. I'd offer feedback when asked, smile during recaps, and quietly delete my own name from versions of the deck they shared with me because I already knew which version the client was going to see. Mine, because when the time came, I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to plead. I was going to click one button, advance slide, and let the contract speak for itself. Mark could try to dazzle them with his recycled metaphors. Kevin could present my strategies like he came up with them in a dream. But none of it mattered once that last line came up on screen. Once that bullet point lit up like a fuse. And when the freight axis lead read it out loud in front of everyone, Mark would realize far too late that his whole performance had been unauthorized. Not just metaphorically. Legally. There's a special kind of sabotage that doesn't come with knives or yelling. It comes in soft little slices, so gentle, you barely notice the blood at first. My first missed pre-brief was chalked up to a calendar error. The second, oh, we assumed you were caught up. The third time, Mark just smiled and said, it was more tactical, nothing you needed to worry about. Right, because the person who built the entire integration plan from the ground up apparently didn't need to know what was being promised in her name. Then came the expense reports. I'd filed a standard reimbursement, mileage, a hotel stay near the freight access hub, and a late-night meal I scarfed down in a rental Camry while revising a migration framework that Kevin later presented as his brainstorm. Normally, our finance team processed that in 3 business days. It took 13. When I followed up, I was told it had been flagged by leadership for extra scrutiny. Leadership, that meant Mark. Next, the Slack comments started getting sharper. Subtle things. On the hash client strategy thread, I posted a note about an undocumented legacy system Freight Axis was using in their warehouse ops. Mark replied with a clapping emoji and a message. Looks like we've got a detective on the team. Good catch, whoever found it, whoever. He knew damn well who found it. It was me. It had always been me. He'd parrot my findings on status calls, too. I just had a thought, he'd begin, right before regurgitating a bullet from my weekly report, remixed slightly to sound like spontaneous insight. He was like a corporate cover band stealing my lyrics and forgetting to change the melody. I stopped correcting him. That would have made me difficult. Instead, I started curating my own archive, a quiet museum of Mark's microaggressions. Every Slack message, forwarded to my private inbox. Every deck revision, screen recorded while I compared edit histories. Every all-hands meeting where he thanked the team without ever saying my name, time-stamped and notated. I became a librarian of my own erasure. It wasn't out of pettiness, it was insurance. The kind you pray you never have to cash in, but tuck away anyway, just in case the house burns down and someone tries to tell you it was never yours to begin with. There was this moment, midweek, where it all just clicked. I was watching Kevin stumble through a freight axis integration rehearsal. He butchered a key protocol I drilled into our internal spec. Mark laughed and said, it's a learning curve, the client won't even notice. I watched from the back of the room, arms crossed, not angry, not hurt, just done. They were rehearsing for a performance I'd written on a stage I built using props I sourced, and they thought I was the janitor who wandered in. Fine, let them flub it. Let them smile through technical failure and hope no one notices. Let them burn through the goodwill I'd spent the better part of a year building like it was confetti at a product launch. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to sabotage them back. I had something better. A clause with teeth. And while they flailed in rehearsals and mocked my obsession with documentation, I was refining my own playbook. Every version of the deck they passed around internally, I kept a clean copy. Every change in language from Susan's integration timeline to team onboarding roadmap, documented. They thought they were erasing me. They didn't realize they were drawing my outline in ink. Mark sent out a final rehearsal invite. Optional, of course. I declined. Instead, I booked a short one-on-one with Denise, the freight axis lead. Just 15 minutes. Just to check in on the final handoff plan. She smiled when she saw my name pop up on her calendar. I was wondering when we'd get to speak again, she said. Things have felt fuzzy, I replied. Yeah, let's clear the lens a little. And then I clicked share screen. Because while they were busy deleting my name from PowerPoint, I had the contract. And Denise, she had eyes. The morning of the pitch, the office buzzed like a hive doused in cologne and espresso. Mark had worn a fresh white shirt, so aggressively starched it crackled when he moved. Kevin was reciting a memorized intro like a fourth grader in a spelling bee. Rachel had her hair pulled back so tight she looked like a hostage. And me? I was sipping coffee in the break room when Mark tapped me on the shoulder like a man interrupting someone else's life. "Can we chat?" he said, already leading me out into the hallway like he was walking me to detention. He stood next to the printer. It smelled like toner and sweat. "Look," he started, giving me that faux concerned head tilt I'd seen him use on clients and interns alike. "Today's a big day for all of us. Let's keep the focus on the team, okay?" I stared at him, blinking slow. Of course. He mistook my stillness for agreement and smiled like a dad who just explained why his son wasn't ready for the big game. "Don't make this about you," he added. "Just be a team player. Be a team player. Right? The same team that cut me out of my own project, deleted my name from slide decks, and paraded my work around like a stolen mascot." "I understand," I said. "Wouldn't dream of it," and I meant it. I didn't have to make it about me. The contract already did. I walked back to my desk and opened the latest version of the presentation on the shared drive. Final for real pitch deck, of course. Always a red flag when file names beg for closure. I scrolled to the very last slide, the thank you/next steps page. It was blank, a placeholder. Something Mark had planned to wing, maybe with a little fist bump or one of his famous vision statements. I clicked edit, and then I added a single sentence. No bolding, no drama. Just clean, dark font, per MSA Clause 9.3b. All project deliverables, sign-offs, and integration authorizations require written consent from the named officer, Susan Langley. Then below that I added my name, small, neat, just enough. I didn't announce it, didn't tell legal, didn't call Denise. I just saved the file and closed it. And then I sat through the longest pitch of my life. Mark opened strong, if you think confidence is the same thing as competence. He made big, sweeping statements about value-driven transformation and frictionless synergies. He used the word leverage 8 times before the first coffee refill. Kevin botched a middleware integration explanation so badly that even Rachel's fingers froze on her laptop keyboard mid-slide advance. But no one interrupted. Freight Axis watched with tight-lipped politeness, the kind you reserve for child's school play where everyone's pretending the kid didn't wet themselves behind the tree prop. Me? I sat at the end of the table, hands folded, face blank. I took notes. I smiled when people looked my way. But mostly I just waited. Waited while Mark butchered my lifecycle framework. Waited while he claimed he led the migration testing I had personally executed over Christmas break while he was off skiing in Utah. Waited while he forgot to mention our phased rollback plan entirely, until Denise brought it up herself and Mark stammered through a non-answer so bad Kevin started typing random numbers into the spreadsheet just to look busy. And still, I said nothing, because I knew what slide was coming. The room was starting to shift. You could feel it. Freight Axis wasn't asking questions anymore. They were waiting for something to make it worth staying in that room. Mark nodded toward Rachel, signaling the close. She advanced to the final slide, and there it was, that one beautiful line, sitting at the bottom of the screen like a pressure switch waiting to be stepped on. Mark saw it, his jaw twitched. He opened his mouth to speak. And that's when Denise leaned forward and said, "Actually, before we wrap, let's read this slide more closely." I didn't look at Mark. I didn't have to. He'd finally run out of stolen words. Air in the room turned thick the second Mark uttered, and that concludes our presentation. We're really excited to move forward. He said it with that same tight smile, the one he probably practiced in the mirror, that smug curvature that screamed, "I think I nailed it," but asked no one if they agreed. Kevin exhaled like he'd just finished a triathlon. Rachel began organizing her pens in victory formation. They thought it was over, wrapped, sealed, sold, but it wasn't over. Not even close. I cleared my throat softly, just enough to be audible. "If I may," I said with the politeness of a bomb technician requesting silence, "could we advance to the final slide?" Mark's neck snapped toward me like a cartoon owl. "Susan," he said low and sharp, "I don't think that's necessary. We've covered, we'd like to see it." Denise cut in, her voice smooth, calm, and unmistakably firm. Mark's mouth opened to protest, but her raised eyebrow said, "Try me." She leaned forward, folded her hands, and gave Rachel a small nod. Rachel clicked. The screen jumped, and there it was, the last slide, black font, white background, no logo, no flourish. Just one line, highlighted in Freight Axis blue, per MSA Clause 9.3b. All project deliverables, sign-offs, and integration authorizations require written consent from the named officer, Susan Langley. Silence fell over the room like a dropped curtain, the kind of silence that hums, that rearranges gravity. Kevin blinked rapidly like he was trying to read Morse code. Rachel went pale, then red, then pale again. Mark's smile froze in place, then cracked. You could almost hear it. Denise leaned back, steepled her fingers, and turned to me. "Miss Langley," she said, "do you consent to the deliverables as outlined in this presentation?" I waited just a beat, just enough time to feel it, the shift, that beautiful, aching tilt when the momentum slides off the rails you were never supposed to be on. "I don't," I said, calm, precise, surgical. The implementation strategy was altered without my knowledge or sign-off, and several critical risk mitigations were removed. Denise nodded once, like she already knew. I could see the Freight Axis technical lead scrolling through his notes, cross-checking timestamps and internal memos that all, no doubt, referenced me. Not Mark, not Kevin, me. Mark started to speak. We assumed Susan's materials had already been incorporated. Denise cut him off without raising her voice. Mr. Halpern, respectfully, our agreement is clear. All strategic sign-offs require Susan's written approval. He tried again. But she raised her hand, not in anger, in dismissal. No need to clarify, she said. The contract speaks for itself. The shift was done. The power had moved. It wasn't even a fight, it was a transfer. Like watching a title deed change hands without ceremony. Mark sank into his chair. Kevin stared at the table. Rachel was suddenly very interested in the clicker she was holding. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Just sat there, watching the slide hang in the air like a gavel. Because what none of them understood was that this moment wasn't about revenge. It was about confirmation. They thought I was decoration, that I'd stand off to the side and watch them drive the bus straight into a wall I built a warning sign in front of. But Freight Axis didn't come for buzzwords. They came for results, for clarity, for me. And now, thanks to one clause they didn't bother reading, I wasn't just the final say, I was the only say. Denise adjusted her glasses and leaned ever so slightly toward the screen, her eyes narrowing like a hawk homing in on its dinner. Let me just read this aloud so there's no confusion, she said, voice steady as bedrock. And then, in the room that just minutes ago had been echoing with Mark's swaggering sales pitch, she spoke the words that cleaved the silence in half. All deliverables, authorizations, and executive decisions require sign-off from Susan Langley, named officer. Each syllable landed like a verdict. Her tone didn't change. Her face didn't twitch, but it hit with the force of a gavel. The room fell into a silence so deep you could hear Kevin's throat click as he swallowed. Mark's lips parted, a breath caught in his throat. Actually, I think what that's referring to is Denise didn't even look at him. She lifted one hand, palm out, like a crossing guard for corporate bullshit. Her eyes stayed locked on me. You're not authorized to speak on this agreement, she said. No drama, no malice, just a surgical strike. Mark froze. Not the kind of freeze where someone waits their turn. The kind where they realize the ice is cracking under their feet, and the water beneath isn't metaphorical. He looked at me, not angrily, not even with blame, just the stunned, hollow look of someone realizing they were never holding the mic, they were lip-syncing the whole time. Rachel instinctively reached for her laptop, like she could control plus Z the last 3 months. Kevin started typing something frantically. Maybe a Slack message, maybe an apology to the gods of procurement. I didn't care. Denise turned back to me. Susan, she said, can you confirm which version of the rollout schedule reflects your current approval? Version 7B, I replied without missing a beat. The one distributed on September 12th. All subsequent revisions were made without my review or consent. And your position on the migration plan, it's incomplete, non-compliant with the client's own infrastructure specs. I flagged it 3 weeks ago. No corrections were made. Denise nodded once, then looked at her team. We'll pause the partnership process here, she said, pending revised documentation submitted directly by Susan Langley. Mark made a noise. Not a word, just a pathetic vocal static, like a dial-up modem trying to connect to a network that no longer wanted him. Mr. Halpern, Denise said, finally acknowledging him with the tone one might reserve for a raccoon trying to steal a sandwich, you were not listed on the original agreement, nor were you authorized to make changes to the deliverable structure. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but we don't build partnerships on unauthorized leadership. He looked like he wanted to argue, but the moment had passed. The lights were on, the magician was exposed, and the rabbit was just a tired old hat. He slumped slightly, just a subtle give in his spine, a small collapse like a deflating ego, and me? I didn't move, I didn't smile, I didn't blink because this wasn't a moment for celebration. This wasn't triumph, it was truth. I was the named officer, not in spirit, not in theory. In ink, and no amount of grandstanding, gaslighting, or glossed-over credits could erase that. Mark wasn't the closer. He was never even in the game. Denise stood, collecting her notes with calm precision like a professor ending a lecture. She didn't look at Mark, didn't even glance in his direction. Instead, she turned to me. Thank you, Susan, she said. Your clarity today was deeply appreciated. We'll be in touch directly with you for next steps. She didn't need to say the rest. Everyone in the room understood what directly meant. Kevin stared at the table like it might open up and swallow him. Rachel was blinking rapidly, still pretending to type, the screensaver glowing behind her dead keystrokes. And Mark was frozen, lips parted, jaw tight, waiting for a moment of redemption that never came. The Freight Axis team stood, shook my hand. Not his, mine, then they left, no polite chit-chat, no corporate promises. No thanks, everyone. Just a clean exit through the glass doors and a quiet click of the latch behind them. Silence. I stood and gathered my own notepad. No rush, no flourish, just the rhythm of someone who knew the moment had already passed. Mark finally found his voice, low and awkward. Susan, can I didn't answer. I didn't even look at him, because there's nothing left to say to a man who just watched his credibility dissolve in real time. I walked out of the conference room with the kind of peace that doesn't come from applause or revenge, but from confirmation. The type of peace that says, I was right to prepare. I was right to protect my name. I was right to wait. Back at my desk, I set my laptop down just in time to see the Outlook notification slide across the top of my screen. Subject, internal review request meeting with legal and HR from HR department. Time, 11:42 a.m. It had been 6 minutes. I clicked it open. Mandatory attendance. Mark was listed in the to field. So was our department director. Meeting was scheduled for 1 p.m. sharp. Agenda, unauthorized leadership actions, deviation from contract terms, breach of chain of command protocols. I didn't smile, but I felt the weight slide off my shoulders like an old coat I never realized I was still wearing. A second email followed 10 seconds later. Subject, access review freight access account transfer from IT admin. Mark's name wasn't on the recipient list. Just mine. And a short note, per client directive, all future freight access correspondence and data access have been reassigned to Susan Langley. Not CC'd, not collaborator, reassigned. I leaned back in my chair, cracked my knuckles once, and let the quiet sit. Around me, the office had resumed its usual drone, phones ringing, keyboards tapping, people pretending they hadn't just witnessed a tectonic shift in the pecking order. Mark hadn't returned to his desk, probably still in the conference room, trying to reboot his sense of relevance. I didn't go check. Instead, I shut my laptop, picked up my coffee, and walked out the side door, past the mural someone in marketing thought would inspire us. Dream big, deliver bigger, fitting. I didn't stop to tell anyone what had happened, didn't drop a mic or make a speech. I just kept walking because the story had already told itself. And Mark, he wasn't the ending. He was the footnote. Follow-up meeting wasn't held in our conference room. It wasn't even on company premises. Freight Access invited me to their downtown office. No RSVP for Mark, no calendar hold for Kevin or Rachel. Just a quiet, discreet email from Denise's executive assistant. Miss Langley, the CEO would like to meet privately regarding future collaboration. I wore gray. No brand names, no statement necklace. Just clean lines, steady breath. The contract folder in my bag, labeled only with my initials. The meeting lasted 42 minutes. Denise opened with this: we'd prefer to work with you directly. Would you be open to serving as our executive integration advisor? Independent of your current firm. No preamble, no flattery, just a simple request born out of necessity. They didn't want a vendor anymore, they wanted me. She slid a document across the table. It was clean. Straightforward. A 6-month engagement, renewable, triple my previous salary, full access to internal systems. Direct reporting to the executive board, no middlemen, no handoffs, no Mark. I didn't answer right away. I asked questions, pushed back on 3 terms, clarified scope, rephrased 2 bullet points for precision. And then I asked them to add a clause. Consultant shall maintain full decision-making autonomy and shall not be managed or reviewed by any employee of her previous employer. Denise smiled. Consider it added. By the time I got back to the office, the story had already spread. Mark's door was open. Too open. His nameplate was gone. The monitors inside had been wiped clean, the whiteboard erased, save for a single word in faint red, Q4. HR said he resigned for personal reasons. Right? There were whispers in the hallway, half pity, half awe. Kevin looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Rachel avoided eye contact like I was radioactive. I walked past them without pause. Back at my desk, my inbox had exploded. 3 emails from senior leadership, all some variation of "can we talk?" and "let's find a way forward." They were too late, way too late. My cursor hovered over the freelance portal. Uploaded the signed advisory agreement. It took 5 seconds. Then the button appeared, accept contract. I clicked it, simple, final, irreversible. The screen flickered, then confirmed, you are now active as Executive Integration Advisor for Freight Access Logistics. My new title, my new role, my terms. I looked up once toward Mark's empty office. And then I looked away, because this wasn't about him anymore. It never really was. He thought power came from titles, from visibility, from controlling the room. But power doesn't shout. It doesn't beg for a spotlight. It gets written into the contract. And waits. Team player, only if I get to pick the team. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.